So recently, one of my followers sent me a message and he had a very interesting story. He was just 14 years old as he was growing up in California. He grew up troubled and would eventually get involved in a gang. This would of course lead to gang violence that would soon spill over to his mother's home. So his mom, who worked 3 jobs, had had enough. She had to do something. She decided it would be good for him to learn a little bit about his heritage from Mexico. He would end up going to visit with his grandfather on his father's side. Little did he know, it would change his life. It just so happens that his grandfather lived near the 7 Luminaries of Mexico. For those of you that don't know, the 7 Luminaries of Mexico are large craters. These craters have been around for generations, and oddly enough, they perfectly mirror the Big Dipper. So many suspect they were actually created by extraterrestrial craft from ETs that hailed from the Big Dipper. And the stories surrounding these craters would say the same thing. He stated that while he was there, you could see UFOs every night. Not only that, you could hear things going on underground. His grandfather would tell him stories passed down from generation to generation. Some of them he even got to witness, like the fact that the craters can grow massive crops. It's rumored they can grow mangoes the size of basketballs, heads of lettuce a meter tall. His grandfather would tell him that the ancient higher beings would come down and see his ancestors. Sometimes they would come from the skies, sometimes they would come from underground. But a certain group in particular would tell them that they could solve world hunger, and they would go on to show them how. The secret is sacred, and it truly has not been shared, but it's said they taught them how to use the energy from the craters. Years ago, the government would catch wind of it, so they would send officials out. But the locals were reluctant to share their secrets, so the government officials would end up calling it a hoax. But trust me, it is no hoax, and the stories will blow your mind. The one that moved me the most will challenge everything you've ever learned about the Aztec, Incan, and Mayan civilizations. His grandfather would explain that it all started when a group of Spanish explorers would land on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico. The group would drop anchor and make their way to shore. When they first landed on the beach, they were greeted by a small fishing tribe that lived nearby. The Spanish sailors were in rough shape. They were starving and dehydrated. While the crew neared death, the only one that was in good health was the priest. As back then, they always took care of the priest before anybody. So while his men had one foot in the grave, he was in perfectly fine shape. The villagers would notice their condition and offer them help. Not only would they give them food and water, but they would heal them in a matter of minutes using an ancient technique learned from the higher beings. They would then take them to their village, which would be a mistake. Upon arrival, the crew was speechless. There was gold everywhere. Literally every building was covered. They had more gold than any of the men had ever laid their eyes on. Not only that, they seemed to have acquired technology. Tech acquired from the sky people. When asked where it came from, they pointed to the sky. The priest seemed unimpressed. So after eating fruits and vegetables they had never eaten, foods they had never dreamed of, the vast amounts of gold, more gold than they had ever seen, they were absolutely amazed at how beautiful the little village was. But in the end, not even that took them back the most. When the villagers began showing their abilities. Abilities not just limited to their women and children being healers. After seeing all this, the priest grew worried. Later that night, when the conquistadors got back to their ship, he would immediately begin preparing for battle, telling the men that these abilities can never be shown to the world. So they must take out that village and any other surrounding in the morning. Little did they know the villagers were pretty smart people in themselves. So the chief would send a scout to watch the Spaniards. It wouldn't take him long to realize what was going on. He would turn and run back to the village, letting the chief know. The chief would tell him continue to the mother and father tribes, the Aztecs and the Mayans, warning them of the danger approaching. Upon hearing this, the Aztec emperor would send warriors to tell the Mayans. The Spanish would attack in the coming days. They would storm the village like madmen, ready to take out anything in their path. But as they approached, there were no warriors waiting. There was nobody ready for battle. They slowed the horses to a trot. The village was completely empty, gold and all. And when they made it to the Aztec and the Mayan empires, they were the same. No gold, no people, empty. So his grandfather said what happened was, after finding out the Aztecs and the Mayans were visited by Mother Nature, creator of all, she would warn them of the fierce enemy at their doorstep. She would give each tribe a key and tell them to head south. So they would gather everything and flee to South America. Each tribe's emperor or leader, key in hand. When they finally come upon their destination, they know this is where they're supposed to be. Above is an example of what they looked for. When they saw this, each chief would slowly place the key in the puzzle. Instantly, they could hear mechanisms begin shifting within the wall. First, small intricate pieces moved, and then larger, until finally a large stone slab about 20 feet tall would shift out of their way. And what was revealed, absolutely mind-blowing. It would open up to a whole nother beautiful world. Standing right in front of them, a large portal. Mother Nature, creator of all, led them to a haven. At that moment, they'd tell their brave warriors they had to go back and to represent their tribes well. Here, they would die a warrior's death. The rest, elderly women and children, would enter the portal, from which they would never return. His grandfather states that he learned Mayans and Aztecs were love and light, that they were decent people and cared for one another, and that the people of his heritage have been misjudged the entire time, and that he hoped one day his story would be heard. Aztec and Mayan warriors would represent well and fight valiantly. So one of my followers who lives in Cali has a grandfather in Mexico. His grandfather lives next to the 7 Luminaries of Mexico. These 7 craters are known for UFO activity. So when my guy went to stay with his grandfather for 9 months, he got to learn a lot about his heritage. And I'm gonna tell you, stick around, cause this shit you don't hear every day. His grandfather said his ancestors had contact with the sky people. They would share secrets with his ancestors, making their lives on Earth easier. Here's some of the accounts from his father and his grandfather. He said they used to have gifts from the earth in the dirt, water, and rocks. That they would rub a special dirt on them before hunts because it would completely camo them, almost invisible. That there was sand that you could roll through and you'd be fire resistant for 40 minutes to an hour. That ETs even showed his people a gooey type water. This water you could shape, and you could shape it to fit your head. It would allow you to stay underwater for 2 hours. Rocks that when crushed and rubbed on the bottom of your feet, would allow you to walk on water.